after a while, especially latterly, the travel is a drag. And one year I was on 70 airplanes in a year, average of 1.5 a week. And so traveling has kind of lost its appeal to me. So I'm going to spend my air ticket budget on a very, very comfortable chair or sofa. And I'm going to hire somebody to bring me books from the shelf. And I will never move other than turn the page. So, because that's the only thing that has really bothered me about being a writer. And I'm sure that everybody watching tonight would sort of agree if they put themselves into that situation. You voluntarily do something that takes away a huge amount of your reading time. And so that has been the only frustration. And I've got literally thousands of books that I'd never had time to get to, and I really want to read. So, yeah, people are looking for me to say, yeah, I'm going to do this or that, or I'm going to swim the English Channel or climb Mount Everest or something. But what people have got to remember is I was born in Europe. I have no work ethic whatsoever. The whole purpose of life is to get to this point and then stop working. And so that's what I'm going to do. Nothing, absolutely nothing.
Well, that's good. And it's good that you've recognized that, because some people don't. They just work themselves to death. So it's nice that you're able to do that.
It is really nice. And, I'm very, very well aware that I'm a lucky guy. I'm in a position that I might not have been in. And I know lots of other people aren't, who are my age and would love to quit, but they just can't afford to. So sure, I'm delighted. It's turned out really, really well. And how rare is that? A plan that worked.
Well, how do you feel now that you've made the decision and you've moving forward at that? Do you feel different things? Do you feel relieved? Do you feel a little melancholy? Do you feel a bit sad? What are your feelings? Or is it a mixture of a lot of things?
Well, inevitably, it's a mixture of a lot of things. But as far as the books go, I'm actually quite excited because, if I just stopped and there were no more books, then I would probably feel, regret and nostalgia about it. But what I feel actually is really excited because I'm still going to get the Reacher books, and I'm really, last year doing the Sentinel was an acid test. That was the thing. How would I feel about a book coming out with my character not written by me? And I loved it. It's a great book, a really exciting story. And it kind of, I suppose, introduced myself to the Reacher fan in me. I like the guy, and to read Andrew's version of it for the next however many years, I'm really looking forward to it. So honestly, my main feeling is excitement about it. Yeah, I just can't wait to see where it goes.
I bet it probably makes it easier transitioning with somebody that you trust, because Andrew, and Andrew, you are a fantastic writer in your own right. I mean, you've written 9 thrillers on your own, and I think you made the right choice, definitely, in trusting Andrew. But does it make the process a little bit easier since you know him so well and he's been there from the start?
Yeah, way easier. I was sort of academically interested for the last many years in the idea of somebody else continuing a series, and I was very much. I had a bunch of friends who did it. Reed Farrell Coleman, who carried on Robert B. Parker's Jesse Stone series. Ace Atkins, who did the Spencer series. And then for the New York Times, I was asked to review the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo book, the 4th in that series that was written by a Swedish journalist called David Lagerkrantz. Mm-hmm. And I was really interested in that book. They shouldn't really have asked me to review it because it was coming out 1 week before my book. So if I had completely trashed it, it would have been leaving the way open for my sales. But I was very honest about it, and I gave it a pretty good review. But the question in my mind was, how possible is it for another writer to get to 100% of recreating a character. And in in the Stieg Larsson trilogy, it's obviously Lisbeth Salander that is such a weird and magnetic character. How closely can another writer get to that? Now, my conclusion was Lagerkrantz got about 95% of the way and just fell a little bit short, frankly. And actually, we met in Sweden not long after that review, and he was really annoyed that I'd said that. But it's the New York Times. You've got to be as honest as you can. And my feeling in the review was that the final margin, the final 5% of the recreation is impossible because it's down to a kind of madness in the author's mind. There's no reason for what you do a lot of the time. It's a lot of the stuff you put in is just crazy, and you can't say why you did it. You can't really justify it, but you put it in because that's what you feel. And I felt that Lagerkrantz, obviously not being the same person as Stieg Larsson, was missing that. So I thought there's no real point, except that with Andrew, we are very, very similar. And I'm very aware that, I don't want to make out that we're clones. We're not twins. Even twins are not all that identical. But we, as close as two people can be, separated by the age gap that we are about as close as you can get in terms of the ins and outs of our mental processes. But it was the word you used originally in the question, trust. I wouldn't have done it with somebody I couldn't trust 100%. And who could I trust, really? There's nobody in the world that I could trust, really, except my brother. And, I mean that sincerely, quite apart from any book stuff. If I was in serious trouble, if I imagine I was in a spy movie and I was in a dungeon somewhere and I managed to steal a cell phone that had enough battery to text one word to one person. I would text a cryptic word and hope that whoever received it could figure out what I meant, where I was, what I needed, what to do. And really the only person in the world who would get that is Andrew. So I felt that, this is about as close to a guarantee as I could possibly get. And I was very concerned about that because, we do not want to con the reader. We don't want to just exploit the reader by giving them something that is different or inferior. So it was a huge issue for me. And I felt, I can totally trust him. He's got the talent and ability, and he knows what it's about, in as much as I am Reacher, then he is Reacher too. And so, it's going to work. That's how I feel.
Andrew, how do you feel taking on this franchise? I mean, because it really is, it's staggering when I think that every 9 seconds, a Jack Reacher's novel is sold somewhere in the world. I mean, that's just really staggering. Andrew, how do you feel about taking over the series? Is it overwhelming at times?
Well, now you've got your score, Deborah. I'm hoping that's going to go down to 1 every 8 seconds. So,
that'd be great.
Got your work cut out for you. But it was you, in one of your questions earlier to Leah, you talked about was there a single emotion or was there a kind of torrent of emotions? And really it was the latter for me, because first of all, I was just absolutely gobsmacked because, as you've just alluded to, Reacher is this phenomenal worldwide creation. And for my brother to trust me with that, I had not seen it coming, and I was incredibly touched by it. So, my first feeling was just one of being, totally surprised. Then I thought, well, can I do it? Because I don't want to let him down. I don't want to let the Reacher fans down, because, I am a Reacher fan. I know what it's like to wait the 12 months for the next installment. So the next thing was, can I do it? And the thing with that question, then it morphs into that sounds to me a little bit like a challenge. And if there's one thing in the world I can't back away from, it's a challenge. You know, when I was a kid, our father, if he thought that there was something that I couldn't do, if he thought something was too difficult or too grown up for me or whatever, the way he tricked me into doing it was he'd always say, oh, that's too hard. Andrew will never be able to do that. Because he knew that would make me do it twice backwards, you know. So the challenge part of it enticed me. But the thing that clinched it was, as I said, you know, I'm the oldest Reacher fan in the world. I remember reading Killing Floor when it was still in pencil. And since then, for a quarter of a century, you know, I lived with Reacher. You know, Lee and I would chat about Reacher. We would joke about Reacher. When we hung out together, we would, you know, it would almost be like Reacher was this sort of imaginary extra brother who was there that, you know, we'd be joking about what would Reacher do here? What would Reacher say about that? So the idea that there would be a world without that annual fix of Jack Reacher, that was just horrible. And I thought, well, if I don't do it, no one, you know, there'll be no more Reacher. So that was the thing that that tipped the balance. And I thought, yeah, I've got to give it a try.
Does you know, I was thinking about the two of you, and I thought, you know, you guys, you know, I'm just wondering, do you feel like you have an even closer bond now sharing this together? I mean, because really, you're the only two people in the world who've written a Jack Reacher novel now.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you know, one funny thing about it, one thing that has changed very slightly is, you know, because you know, my other three brothers are older than me. I spent the first, like 51 years of my life feeling like I was playing catch up, you know, feeling like it was always a disadvantage being the little one, you know, never being as big as the others or as fast as the others or having got as many qualifications as the others or, you know, knowing how to do as much as the others. So being young, you know, for the first 51 years of my life it was a disadvantage. And then overnight, it suddenly became, the pendulum swung all the way in the opposite direction, and suddenly being younger flipped over and actually became something that was in my favor. So I think that's really the main thing that changed from my point of view. I feel like a grown-up now.
Well, you know, Lee, I told you earlier that the story about how you started it all, to me, is just so inspirational, especially now that we've had such upheaval in the world, and you know, with things that you thought you were going to be doing this time last year, you know, but thanks to the pandemic and everything, it's just been upended, and you ended up getting having to start over. Basically, you were in a job for 18 years, and so, you know, you left, and you decided to sit down and write a novel. I mean, is it true you spent $6 and got paper and pencil and then you wrote Killing Floor?
Yeah, I mean, the whole backstory of that is I joined a TV company straight out of college, basically, and it was wonderful. It was just the most fabulous production company. It was fabulous people. We were making great shows. We were paid a fortune. It was all wonderful. You know, in my first week there, I was being trained by somebody who had a lunch date and said, come with me. We're having lunch with some actors. And so I went to lunch with her, and I had, in my first week, I had lunch with, it was Laurence Olivier, Alec Guinness, Ralph Richardson, and John Gielgud. That was my lunch date, and it just got better from that. And as you say, I was there for 18 years. We made Brideshead Revisited, Jewel in the Crown, Prime Suspect, Cracker, a whole lot of great documentaries. Just a wonderful, wonderful job, and I would have happily done it the rest of my life, except that one day my boss said something to me that made it just impossible to continue. He said, "You're fired." And that was, you know, not because of like a misdemeanor on my part or anything. It was just that thing that happened in the 90s where they suddenly figured out, yeah, we can trash all the expensive old dinosaurs, and we can hire, you know, interns for a quarter of the money, and we can bring in computers and all that kind of thing. So yeah, I was out of work at the age of very nearly 40, which, it's not a great time to be out of work, but actually it's not a terrible time either. I was, I had no cushion, I had no savings, I was completely broke. They paid me off to leave, and I paid off my credit cards and all of that, and I had 7 mortgage payments in the bank. So it was a question of getting something together within 7 months. Otherwise, I would be foreclosed upon and all of that kind of thing. So I thought, in a way, when you're 40 and that happens to you, it is traumatic. But equally, if you take a step back and just calm down for a second, you realize that, you've got 20 years of experience by that point, 20 years of good habits and discipline and so on. You're not the idiot that you were when you were 20. And so it's really up to you to stand back and think, what am I good at? What can I do? Which in the first instance was problematical because I was highly trained for a very idiosyncratic job that I'd just been fired from. So I had no literally transportable skills. But fundamentally, what I'd been doing was entertaining an audience, knowing what audiences like, knowing how audiences feel and respond to things. And so I thought, all right, how can I use that skill? And then I thought to myself, well, I'll write a book. I've read some. How hard can it be? And so that's how it all started out.
You ever look back and play the what if game? Because think about it. I mean, from where Jack Reacher is today, and we're all here because of that, if you had stayed with them, where you would be.
Absolutely. If I'd stayed in TV, if that hadn't happened, first of all, it was, I started in the 70s, and therefore legislation was very different. And our contracts back then had a mandatory retirement age of 60. And so I would have been retired already a number of years. Obviously Reacher would never have happened. I'd have probably been happy enough, but because you can't tell, what are you missing? You don't know what you're missing. So if I'd stayed in TV, I think I'd have been all right, but this is better, it really is. This was better. This was a really good second act. And I will always remain incredibly grateful to, I'm not saying that I didn't deserve it. I worked very hard and I did the best I could in terms of the books, but you get huge support from your publisher and the booksellers. Everybody just rallied behind Reacher, and the success is really not mine. I mean, you said at the beginning I've sold over 100 million books, and that was a number of years ago. It sounds awful, but we've given up counting because it's just too difficult. But if somebody says to me, how many books have you sold? I say I've sold 24, one a year to the publisher. And if they have managed to shift multiple copies of each title, that is their achievement, not mine. And so you are aware that it's a strange dichotomy with writing. It is such an individualistic pursuit. It is just the writer and the reader ultimately that are concerned. But there's a huge cast of characters, from the heads of publishing companies all the way down, hundreds of people, to the newest clerk at the register in the bookstore. All of them are helping you. And I'm just deeply grateful to everybody, the readers especially, for, because it's been a hell of a good life, I've got to tell you.
Well, thank you for saying that. That's very generous of you. I really thought about that story so much when I read it, because it really resonated with me, because I thought, I love stories like that. And I thought, okay, so you were downsized, but now you actually help employ a lot of people. So, the irony of it is just wonderful. So
yeah, the irony of those people firing me is, you know, it was stupid. I was good at my job. It was a stupid decision to not just me, but, you know, my generation. We were doing a really good job. And it was just that, you know, we had good salaries and we had pensions and we had benefits and all that kind of thing. And it just didn't work in the modern era. But they were stupid. They distributed a lot of talent elsewhere. And in my case, to the book world, in other cases elsewhere. And they should have hung on to it. They really should.
Did you ever hear from the guy who had to deliver the news to you?
Actually, yeah. I mean, it was really, well, first of all, I used them all, probably 6 or 8 of them in the early books as the bad guys. You know, Reacher would dismember them one after the other. And I did actually bump into the CEO that fired me. And it had been very personal because I'd also been shop steward for the Technicians Union. So not only for me, but for every single person, I'd been involved in bitter arguments with this guy. And it was about a year or so later, maybe a year and a half. And my wife and I developed this, this habit. Every time a book comes out, we buy a painting to celebrate the publication. And if possible, we buy a living artist so that some live person is getting some of the money. And we were in a gallery in Bond Street in London, looking at a potential purchase. Didn't actually like it, so we walked across the shop to the expensive side, and there was a Corot, you know, the French Impressionist, and beautiful, beautiful painting. And we were just standing there, staring at it. And my ex-CEO walked into the gallery with his trophy girlfriend. Actually, he was gay, but back then, for some reason, he was going around with a beard and he had this sort of pretend girlfriend with him. And because she was there, he felt he had to be very polite. So we didn't start a fist fight immediately. He was sort of polite about it. And she, of course, knew nothing about the history. So she just said, she joined us at the Corot and was looking at it with us. And she said, you like that? And I said, yes, I really do. I think it's great. But, you know, I could have never afforded this kind of painting when I was working for him. And he looked like so deflated because this was $1 million painting. I was not going to buy it, but he thought maybe I was.
That's the best kind of revenge, is living well. Andrew, back to you. What kind of vision do you have for Jack Reacher now? I mean, because obviously there's going to be some changes, and there obviously was in the Sentinel, where now you have Jack Reacher has more embracive of technology. Are there any other things that you see your vision for him going forward?
Well, you know, it's very hard to answer that specifically, because one of the things that I learned working with Lee on the Sentinel is that, you know, despite having written books of my own, you know, his method was pretty different to mine. I've never been a kind of one of those insanely detailed outliners, but, you know, I always like to have some kind of an idea where the story was going, whereas Lee really doesn't. You know, there would be all kinds of times when we would finish a scene, would be happy with it, and I'd say to him, okay, so what happens next? And he'd say, well, I don't know. You know, which was a new way of working for me. So, you know, I've learned to embrace that. You know, and we're really running with that on the new one that we're working on. And so, if you sort of expand that forward in terms of the future books, you know, the same principle applies. You know, where they'll be set, what the issues will be, what the minutiae of the story is going to be, I can't say. But I think what I can say in broader terms, and it might be things that, you know, were evident in the Sentinel, I kind of hope that it is in a way, is that one thing Lee really wanted was for Reacher to be not exactly brought into the 21st century, but, you know, at least nudged a little closer to the present day in terms of not just him using technology, but the kind of technological themes that exist in the books. You know, so in the Sentinel we had the ransomware and all that kind of stuff. But so that was something that he wanted, and what I wanted to do, and I saw it almost as a kind of counterpoint, was that if he wanted Reacher nudged forward a little bit, you know, I was thinking about the previous 24 books. And one of the things that I really liked in the earlier books that I think was a little bit more to the fore in those books than it was in the later ones was, you know, Reacher used, you know, there was a real witty, sarcastic side to Reacher that I absolutely love. And, you know, I really wanted to kind of bring that back in a little bit more prominently into the mix. So, you know, there's a sort of one step forward, you know, 1 foot leading forward a little bit, the other, you know, stretching back. So, you know, more of that kind of balance, you know, the slightly more contemporary, you know, in terms of technology and society, but also, you know, bringing back some of the parts of Reacher that we saw more of in the earlier books.
Now, you alluded to it, and I want to touch back on it. You've already started number 26.
Yeah, well, one of the things, you know, Lee always had the tradition of starting each and every book on the 1st of September, you know, and you mentioned about, you know, buying the pad of paper and the pencils and all. So we don't buy paper and pencils anymore, but we you know, the Sentinel and the new one, the two that we've worked on together, we started both of those on the 1st of September. So we've got a little bit of mileage under our belts on the second one already. So, you know, too early to say where it's going and how it's going to work out. But you know, it's started and it's underway, and we're having a lot of fun with it.
And it should be released probably at the same time every year in the fall, right?
Yeah, whatever Tuesday it is in that week, you know, because it was 27th of October this year. So whatever the Tuesday, the equivalent Tuesday, most likely next year, I would think.
Lee, I was looking at I found something interesting about you when I was looking at your bio, and it said that you got awarded the CBE award. And I'm like, what is a CBE? I had to look that up. Because, you know, in Americans, we don't know. It's the Commander of the Order of the British Empire last year. So congratulations.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it was you know, everything. It was a British award, and you get nominated for some kind of cabinet level or government level. And, you know, everything in Britain either has a sort of royal name or an empire type connection. So it's Commander of the British Empire is what it is. But really, it's like the National Medal for the Arts or something like that. That particular level, CBE, is the highest you can get to before you become a Sir. And they tend to give it to entertainers or actors. You know, it's somebody who is well known in that field, very much like the National Medal for the Arts. And I'm not particularly a monarchist, and I certainly think that the history of the British Empire itself is extremely checkered with some very negative aspects and so on. But I'm a tart. You know, if somebody offers me something, I'll take it. And yeah, if somebody wants to give me a prize, I'm right there. And so I said, sure. And it was fabulous. It's a fabulous medal. And you go to Buckingham Palace to be given it. And I did that in February this year, just before, just as the panic was starting, actually. I mean, I can't believe that I did it actually now, because, you know, we'd heard about the virus and all of that, but we went anyway. And fortunately didn't catch it. I got the medal, and by a really, really happy coincidence, the medal is lovely, and the colors in the medal and the ribbon are the exact colors of my favorite soccer team. So I felt that was very, very apposite and very correct and appropriate.
Did the Queen present it to you herself?
Prince Charles it was.
Okay. Have you met the Queen?
I never have met the Queen. No, I've never really felt any interest in it, and she has never expressed any interest in it either. So I doubt if we will ever meet.
Was this the first time you met Prince Charles?
Yeah, it was. Actually, I was going to, you know, I was going to meet the Queen in about, when must it have been? 2012, I guess, because it was her Jubilee, 60-year Jubilee. and they were having a bunch of events. And I was invited to a reception with her and Princess Kate, but I said no, partly because as I said, I'm not that into royalty, and secondly, because I already had a booking for a library in Seattle, the Kings County Library System. I was due to be keynote speaker, and I would never let down a library, not even for the Queen of England.
That's really cool. So it's on a, is it on a, you wear it? Is that how the badge, how the CBE award is?
Yeah, it's on a ribbon that goes around your neck. And in fact, you get given two ribbons. One is longish, so it hangs sort of here. And then you get a short ribbon for when you're wearing your tux at a formal dinner. It's very short, so it's the medal sort of hangs here. But I'm sure I'll never wear it. It's just nice to have it.
Well, you can send it to me. I'll wear it everywhere. I'll wear it when I go to grocery store. Andrew, what do you think about the new series that's coming up on Amazon Prime? Are you both going to be involved with it, or what's the scoop on that?
Yeah, well, as it stands at the moment, I'm not involved in it. I mean, I hope that it's such a fantastic success that pretty soon they burn through all of the books that Lee wrote on his own, so that pretty soon they're needing the Sentinel and the next one, so that I can get involved. But I'm really looking forward to it, and the main reason for that is, there was all kinds of mutterings and grumblings when the two movies came out, and I think that a lot of that was really misplaced, because, the main issue, I think, if you think about how a Reacher book works, a lot of people will immediately think about, the fight scenes and the action and the violence, but really that's quite a small part of the book. A lot of the book is what I've heard described as thinking along with Reacher. It's about Reacher being thrust into a really mysterious and confusing situation and having to figure out what's going on, what's happening, who's behind it, and then how to sort it out. And of course, the conclusion will be satisfyingly violent, but getting there is very cerebral. And so in the books, there could be, there'll be a number of sequences, and each sequence will have maybe 10 or 12 steps to it as Reacher figures stuff out. And in the books, that's delicious, because you follow each one. Each one is dovetailed perfectly into the next and the next, and it's an incredibly satisfying experience. But the thing is, if you took each and every one of those episodes and put it into a movie, you'd have like 3 weeks in the movie theater. You can't do it in 90 minutes. So what tended to happen was, inevitably, and I don't mean this in a negative, in a pejorative way, it's just a fact. If you're cutting a book down into 90 minutes worth of screen time, you have to cut corners and you have to cut out a lot of those steps. And so Reacher's process, the thing that makes him so unique and so appealing, was lost because of the fact that he had to do everything so quickly. He'd walk into a room and immediately spot where something was hidden, or he'd meet a bunch of people and immediately know who the bad guy was, rather than going through the whole process of figuring it out. So I think that the thing with the streaming TV show, that format is just so much more, before you even get into actors or anything like that, the format itself is so much more suitable. So I think it's going to be really, really enjoyable, and I can't wait to see the first episode.
Do we have a date yet for that? I haven't seen anything yet.
No, well, we haven't started shooting it because of the pandemic. I mean, it was supposed to be already in progress in the fall in Georgia, because the first season is Killing Floor, and so they were going to shoot it in the correct location. Plus, of course, Georgia gives you tremendous tax breaks, so that it's very economical to work there. But the pandemic put paid to that, so we're basically frozen over the winter, and we're going to start up again in the spring, which is fine, because we need that kind of weather. I believe actually Killing Floor is set in, if I remember correctly, it's set in like April or something, or September. Can't remember. So, certainly not winter time. So doing it in the spring will be great. But you know, Andrew says he's not going to have anything to do with the first. Well, he will, because he's going to be in it. We're both going to be in it.
Ooh.
We're going to have, you know, in the two movies, I had cameos in both movies, and that tradition is going to continue. So when you're watching the first season, if you see two shady looking characters sitting in the back of a bar or something, that'll be me and Andrew.
That is very, very cool. I'm really pleased with the casting. I don't know if you had any input on it, but Alan Ritchson, he's really looks like he would be the part, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I did have, with the movies, I made a conscious decision to not be interfering, because it's so hard to know what works best. You know, do they work better if I'm watching over their shoulder, or does that make them nervous and distracted? And so, do they do better if I'm staying away? So, although I visited a lot, you know, I had a permanent invitation and I went down to see them all a lot while they were making them. I didn't really have any strategic involvement, because I wanted to pass the project to them and let them do it. But clearly I should have had more, you know. The Tom Cruise issue really upset all the fans and so on. So I said, yeah, I'm going to be involved, especially in the casting. And so it was weird casting, doing it by Zoom. Doing screen tests by Zoom was the weirdest thing. But, and we looked at a lot of people, and because we had to get it right. You know, we cannot afford another casting mistake. It has to be right. And it's not as easy as you think. You know, there's not a huge amount of gigantic actors, really very few. Almost none. You know, there's something mysterious about the camera. As we know, cinema is over 100 years old, and if you meet actors, if you meet successful movie actors, they're all tiny, and so there must be some kind of evolutionary reason for that. The lens must like small people better somehow, and so actors, as a race, tend to be very small. I mean, seriously minute. And so finding a big one is difficult. And we were down to, there were probably only 5 or 6 actors in America that were good enough to do it. And we looked at them all, and this guy, Richson, was exactly what I wanted. I'm never going to say this to his face, but he's not really very good looking. You know, he's just a sort of plain, rugged guy. He's very big, and he has that thing about when he steps into a room, the temperature drops a degree and everybody's not quite sure, you know, is he going to kill them or not? And he has that kind of courtesy. We talked about it before, and I said, the main thing you got to remember about Reacher is that he's a West Point graduate and a US Army officer. And that gives him a kind of strange, old-fashioned courtesy and politeness about the way he conducts himself. Even though he's about to kill you with a pipe cleaner, he says, "Ma'am, stand aside," or something like that. And so he totally got that, Richson did, and he's going to be really, really good. And the showrunner is a guy called Nick Santora, who is, he is, you know, having worked in the business myself for 20 years, it's irrelevant whether or not they're like superstar writers or whatever. You need somebody who will get the job done on time and on budget. That is his role, and he's brilliant at that. And we've written the first season. It's really, really good. So I'm really looking forward to getting going on it. Yeah.
So you help work on the scripts too.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to have some kind of input and control, so they send me all the stuff. And, you know, Amazon is the platform, and Amazon is really good. You know, they spend a lot of money, and they certainly are very enthusiastic about it. But they're also a little tiny little bit sticking their oar in. And so it's easier for me to tell them to get lost than it is for the production people. So I have a kind of bad guy role in that, you know, the bad cop. if they want something that we don't think is a good idea, it's me that says no. And that the politics of that are much easier.
Right. Well, I'm excited. I can't wait.
I know Amazon and me, we go back literally to the very beginning. Amazon started out just like 18 months before my first book came out. So I first met Jeff Bezos in 1997. I visited Amazon for the first time in 1998 when I was on tour. And literally, I met everybody who worked for Amazon in one afternoon back in 1998. And of course, it's grown a little bit since then, but they know who I am because they've been selling my books for their entire existence. And, I've made them money on the books. And so now they trust me. So we get along really well.
That's great. I'm glad you're not giving up control, because I've heard from some authors and they say that, sometimes they're disappointed with how it's been handled. And I would think, that's why I was asking you, Andrew, how, when you take over something that somebody else has created, how to stay true to that vision. And that's why I think you'll do such a great job, because like I said, you were there from the beginning. Now, last time you were on, and then we've got some people that weren't, for the benefit of the people who weren't on the other call, you told us the story how Lee got his name, and it was so good. Do you mind repeating it? Because it was just so funny. He tells it so well, Lee. Hope you don't mind.
I don't mind.
This is weird, me telling Lee's story. This will be where you see if I've embellished it at all.
I hope so, yeah. You're a writer.
Do you ever find that? Tasha and I find all the time that we'll talk about some TV show that we like, and we'll talk about some episode, and we'll say, oh yeah, remember the episode where there's that character and they say such and such, and we have a particular memory of it, and then we rewatch that episode and it's completely different, because we've just, it's morphed in our minds into something else. So you'll have to tell me whether this is anything like what actually happened. But the version I remember was, I heard about how, again, back in the 70s, long before you had any thoughts about writing books or anything like that, you were visiting Jane's family in upstate New York, and you'd headed down to Manhattan, and you were riding on the subway, and you came across some youngish guy who was obviously bursting with excitement and desperate to share some kind of good news. So you asked him what was going on, and he told you that he had just bought his first car. And you said, oh, great, because, we both love cars. So you said, that's great. What kind of car did you get? And he just bought a kind of Renault. It was the kind that in Europe we called the Renault 5. But over here they called it Renault Le Car to make it sound sort of European and exotic. Only this fella was from out west somewhere, and he called it Lee Car. And you were kind of taken with this guy being all excited about Lee Car. So it became a kind of family sort of running joke that everything was Lee something, Lee this, Lee that, Lee kettle, Lee teapot. And then, as time went by and, your daughter Ruth was on the way, it became, Lee baby and then Lee child. So when you needed a pen name, Lee child fit the bill.
Yeah, and that is correct. And that's also, in my experience, it is how you know whether it's a writer family or not. And that is years and years before Andrew wrote his first book. I knew that he would end up writing a book because he had a baby called Katie. And except at one point he was calling her Brian. So you got this girl baby who is called Brian. And I instantly knew why, because, when they're little babies, they get all agitated about whatever, and they go red in the face. And Katie went not only red in the face, but her whole head turned red. And there was this radio presenter on the news shows in Britain called Brian Redhead. So instantly I knew that why Katie was referred to as Brian, and I instantly knew that Andrew would end up a writer, because that is the touchstone, that is the bellwether, that in a writer's household it is endless word games. to the point where it is incomprehensible to outsiders.
So you knew that he was going to be a writer before he did?
Oh yeah, yeah.
That's cool. Did he tell you that, Andrew?
No, he didn't. I'm just laughing though, thinking about that. Yeah, I remember calling Katie Brian. People thought I was crazy calling a little, a cute little baby girl Brian, but what can you do?
Do you still call her that occasionally?
Not so much. She's like 5'11", and I don't think she'd take to it very well now.
She's a very dignified grown up now, and her head does not go red when she gets upset. So that's class.
She hardly ever gets upset anymore. She's extraordinarily just sort of serene and placid now.
How did that happen? I mean, that is so unlike anybody else in the family.
No, it's really unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, if Andrew or I get mad, we burn down somebody's house. We're not serene about it.
Well, let me start taking some questions from the attendees. I've got some questions ready for you. One is from Bridget. Bridget, you want to wave?
Hi, Bridget.
Bridget says, she says, it was about you being a judge for the Man Booker Prize, and is it something you do every year? And how many submissions do the judges have to read?
Well, it was a bit, it was a year that I was offered the CBE and I was offered the Booker Prize judging gig, and it was like I was being sucked into the establishment. And I thought, the Booker Prize, I probably read half of them anyway, because I'm a ferocious reader. So it would have been a serious commitment, but not that much more than I would have read anyway. So I said, sure. And we had 162 submissions that we had to read from between January and July. So it was basically a book a day for 7 months. And I enjoyed it. I really did. And to be honest, and I know that it's a difficult thing to say because the pandemic was so bad for so many millions of people. But for me personally, being a Booker judge, it was the best thing ever because I had literally nothing else to do except lie down and read a book every day. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it because more than anything, I loved the randomness of it. Because when I was a little kid, I loved reading. Reading was what I absolutely loved to do. And we had some books in the house, but it wasn't a question ever of buying books. You would go to the library. And our library was quite small and quite disorganized, really. And you were allowed 2 books a week, which was not enough for me. So we operated a kind of Chicago voting system in our house that if anybody ever visited the house, we would sign them up for a library ticket. Our dog had a library ticket. And so that I would be able to get 6 books a week. And but the choice of books was fairly limited. And so it was a completely random experience. I would just walk into the library and what was available was pretty random. And I became addicted to the randomness of it. I just loved not knowing what was coming next, opening a book, not knowing whether it was going to be, even what it was about. It could be about anything. It could be the best book I'd ever read. It could be the worst. You had no idea. And I just loved that randomness. But then when you get into the business, there is no more randomness because you've heard the buzz about everything. You know what's coming up. And so the randomness goes away. And the Booker Prize brought it back. You had to read those 162 books in that order so that you could discuss them periodically with the other judges. So I got back the randomness of it, which I really, really liked. And what you got was, this has happened to me maybe half a dozen times or something. You're walking down the street with a friend and you pass a bookstore and they grab you by the elbow and pull you into the bookstore and they buy a book and then they press it into your hands and they say, you've got to read this. that is the best possible sort of recommendation to me. And that is what the Booker Prize is. It's the heads of publishing houses think long and hard about it. They have very limited number of submissions. And so they've got to choose very carefully. And essentially they press it into your hand and say, you've got to read this 162 times in a row. So I really enjoyed it. Yeah. And it was a process that was very charming. And I mean, it was not great for me because I've been isolated in mountain time. And of course the Booker Prize is in London, and they wanted the meetings at 1 p.m., which for me is 6 a.m. So I was up early for all those discussions, but they made me a little bit more terse and focused, certainly. You know, I wasn't polite about the bad ones because it was 6 in the morning. Wow.
I'm a pretty fast reader, but I don't think I could read a book a day. That would be tough. So that's really impressive. Okay, this one is from Duncan, is that Munro? Yes, Munro, Duncan Munro, sorry. This is for both of you. It says, he says, hi, Lee and Andrew. Duncan, if you're there, raise your hand, wave. It says, thank you for executing a flawless changing of the guard for our favorite drifter. Reacher's earliest exploits were inspired by real people in the life of James Grant, who were deserving of Reacher's brand of justice. Should those who have crossed Andrew Grant be looking over their literary shoulder for an imposing shadow as Reacher puts right some real life wrongs?
Well, you know that. Well, first of all, Duncan, thank you so much. That is music to our ears. I'm so happy that you responded to the Sentinel that way. So thank you for saying that. And secondly, actually, it's interesting because if there are any Reacher fans out there, I'm sure you recognize the name Duncan Munro from the Affair, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you know, Duncan is a long-standing Reacher fan, and so you know, that's high praise indeed. But the thing is, as you know, as Deborah said earlier, you know, I actually did, you know, I wrote 9 other books before taking Jack Reacher on, and when I started those books, they were obviously the ones I wrote soonest after leaving the corporate world that I had been stuck in for 15 years after you know, I started out in theatre, and then when I was too broke to continue in theatre, I moved into the corporate world, which was fine in terms of topping up the bank account, but disastrous in terms of, you know, sort of the fit between, you know, me and the rest of the people there. So I had an enormous supply of people that, as you said, you know, the imposing shadow was getting ready to visit. But you know, I had 9 books to work through all of those, so I'm not honestly sure if I have any of them left now.
Just let me say that Duncan Munro actually is Jack Reacher. He is a good friend of mine, Australian guy, and the Australian publisher some years ago ran a competition where you could send in your photo, and if you sort of resembled Jack Reacher in some way, you would win the competition. And I was doing an event in Australia, and long signing line, and the very last guy, I look up and I thought, oh my God, this is Jack Reacher. Duncan Munro is this huge guy, and actually is like, he's a soldier like Reacher. He has no home like Reacher because he was always been deployed. I mean, I hope I'm not giving away Australian government secrets here, but he was in this joint task force, the Australian Army and the federal police, going around the Pacific Rim, essentially assassinating smugglers. This is what this guy has been doing. And he's a terrific guy. He looks exactly like Jack Reacher. And in fact, he came to BoucherCon in San Francisco one year where we had Reacher lookalikes. And he's terrific, a good friend. He once gave me a pair of shoes that I still wear. And so, yeah, he's one of the good ones. He's a keeper.
Oh, that's fabulous. Well, thank you. Thank you for the question, Duncan. M. Norskog, I don't know if I mispronounced it. Forgive me if I do. The question is, Jack Reacher is a rich and complex character. Do Lee and Andrew follow any sort of process of ritual when they are creating new characters to ensure readers will connect with them?
Gosh, I mean, that's a tough question. I think on a serious literary level, I don't know how you create a character, to be honest. You just have to, I mean, it's got to be aspects of people that you know, or people that you've met, or situations you wished you were in or glad you're not in. You just find your way to a character that sort of a way. You know, with the Sentinel, the thing that I thought was, the reason why I knew it was going to work was Andrew wrote the first scene, and he did it from the very first view of the book we get is from the point of view of the victim, this guy, Rusty Rutherford, who's the IT guy who has been blamed for this cyberware attack. And he's a rather hapless guy, but sort of sticking to his principle. He knows he wasn't wrong and he wants to kind of prove it, but he's got no chance of doing that. And that was a really well-drawn character. And it was exactly how I would have started the book if I'd been doing it alone. And so where does that character come from? Obviously, it's somebody that Andrew knew, or it's a composite of the type of people that he knew. And that's all you can do. You have to select a bunch of details or characteristics and put them together. And with a bit of luck, they're going to come out authentic and plausible. But it's a mysterious process. And I'll certainly answer any question about process, but generally my answer is, I don't know. It just sort of happens.
Andrew, do you have anything to add about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very much how it happens. I mean, I think it's a combination of all kinds of things. I think there's a degree of instinct involved, you know, like Lee said, you know, creating that character for the Sentinel. That, you know, that what he described for Rusty, that was exactly what I was aiming for. And the reason I was aiming for it was I just had this sort of, this gut feel that that was the kind of character we needed in the story. So then once you decided, well, that's the kind of character we want, next question is, well, where does it come from? And I think it's a sort of combination of, some people describe the process of writing as being a little bit like being a journalist, only the thing you're reporting on is not real life. It's something that you see in your head. So you see this thing happening in your head and you write it down. But the characters that you see in your head, I'm sure really they are just an amalgamation of bits and pieces of different people that you've met and that you've known over the years. So, and some of it's not really conscious, you know, your mind absorbs all of this stuff and it lurks away at the back of your brain somewhere and percolates away and then pops out at the appropriate time when you need it.
This question is from Jessica Beaver, right? Jessica, if you're there. The question she has is, she says, I noticed that most fiction audiobooks are read by others, while nonfiction are read by authors. Have you ever read one of your books for audio, Lee?
No, I never have, and I never will, because for two reasons, really. One is that my accent is wrong. You know, I've got a British accent that does not represent the story correctly. And also because to read an audiobook there's an element of industrial efficiency about it. You know, they got to get it done in a couple of days. And to do that, there is a certain sort of person that has this freaky talent where they can just read for 20 or 30 minutes, reading out loud without ever screwing up. And that is a very distinct talent that very few people have, and I certainly don't have. I used to see that in TV all the time. You know, we would have documentary series with all kinds of complicated concepts and names and foreign things. And those guys that could do the voiceover would do it in one take, even though they've got really no idea what it was about or who these people were, but they could do it in one take, convincingly, compellingly. And I couldn't do that. You know, I would be stopping every couple of minutes because I stumbled or something. And the book would take 3 weeks to record and it would be a disaster. So not only have you got to have the right kind of voice, but you've got to have that peculiar talent that you can, and people should try this at home. Just try reading for 20 or 30 minutes out loud without screwing up. It's really difficult.
Yeah, I have a little bit of a stutter, and so I totally get it. I couldn't do it either.
Especially with your own stuff, because you would be reading along and you'd be thinking, wait a minute, that's a stupid word. And you'd want to change it or whatever. And you can't do that either.
Yeah, it's too late now when it's already in print. We got a question from Guy Ventresca, if I'm saying it right. He says, I've watched at least 7 joint interviews with the brother's child, and each one is different. My biggest takeaway thus far is Lee has invented a new future disease, death by lethargy. Tell him it came from Guy. And Andrew promises and delivers on his role as Reacher's #1 fan by giving us the Sentinel. Let's see. So I don't know if that's actually a question, more of an interview, more of a statement rather.
Well, just let me say hi. Guy is another real good fan and friend, and he actually, I use his name and his description and a little bit of his background in Blue Moon. Guy used to be an army in the armored division, the tank commander, and so he walks the walk, and so he's a great reader to have. And so read Blue Moon with that in mind. The character Guy Ventresca is based on this real guy, including his appearance. I believe, I'm not aware that Guy has shot very many people recently, but he certainly does in the book.
Well, it's an honor to be, and I'm sure for him to be in your book. We have a question from Chris Baker. She says, Andrew, are you going to write any other books besides the Jack Reacher books? Because you have your own line that you write under the name Andrew Grant.
Yeah, that's right. Well, thank you. I mean, again, it's a hard question to answer because, like Lee was saying earlier, we're sort of, the author is one cog in a big machine. So, we don't get to make all of the decisions. But what I can say is that there'll certainly be one more Andrew Grant book. I'm going to write that next year. It's going to be another one in the Paul McGrath Janitor series. Originally, it was slated to be written this year, but we decided that with the transition to Reacher, having to figure out the whole kind of co-writing, cooperating thing, and then with all the chaos and upheaval with the pandemic, it just made more sense to shelve it for 12 months. So the third of the Janitor books will be written next year, probably. I guess it comes out the following year, and after that, really, it's in your guys' hands. If you want me to write more, that means you've got to buy lots of the Janitor, and then they'll offer me another contract, because I would love to keep doing it, but it's going to be down to you guys rather than down to me.
Sure. Well, I know I'm doing my part, encouraging everybody to buy both of your books and all of your books. I have another question from Bridget. She says, this one's for Andrew. She says, Andrew, other than writing books together, is there something that you and Lee like to do together as brothers?
Yeah, there's all kinds of things. And I mean, we haven't had the chance recently with the pandemic and everything else, but, over the years, we've done all kinds of stuff. We always used to, Lee mentioned the football club earlier with the same colors as the CBE ribbon. We've Aston Villa in Birmingham, where we're from. So we would go to the Villa together. We would go out afterwards. In England, the big tradition is you go out for an Indian meal. So we would then go out for a curry down the Bristol Road after the match. We'd hang out together. We would, listen to music, talk about books. When I was a teenager, the thing that kept me sane was escaping and going to stay with Lee and his wife from time to time. So all over the years, a lot of different things.
Yeah, we have a terrible habit of encouraging each other to buy cars. If we see like a really cute car, like a vintage or interesting car, I'll get this text from Andrew, what do you think of this? And I'm like, yeah, buy it, it's great. And we suffered it separately because we are separated in age, but we suffered from the same thing, which was this very kind of boring, sensible, repressed upbringing where anything that resembled having fun was completely forbidden. And so we developed a tradition of what we call mental health days, of just doing ridiculous things. And my favorite was, he was visiting with me in New York, and I had a red convertible. And in England, he, by coincidence, also had a red convertible. So on the Friday night, we went to Yankee Stadium in my car to watch the Yankees. And then immediately we flew to Britain, and in his car, we went to Villa Park to watch the Aston Villa soccer. Sort of seamless continuum. And that's sort of typical of the crazy things we do, because we're trying to compensate for never having had any fun when we were kids.
Yeah. Was that the time the brakes went on fire on mine? I remember we were driving down the road, and this trucker was kind of waving and making all these wild gestures. So we thought, you know, what's up with this guy? So you know, we pulled up alongside him, and he told us that the front brakes were on fire.
Yeah, right. That was a good one, and because there was I can't remember who sang it now, but there, in the 60s, there was a great song called "This Wheel's on Fire," and so that's my memory of that day. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I remember, because Andrew's very particular about his cars, and we went to the mall and parked in an underground garage, and a little droplet of damp fell off the concrete roof and landed on the hood of his car. And you know what concrete is like? It has that slightly white stain to it. So immediately we had to go around to the car wash and have it licked clean by whatever car wash people were there.
Well, that's great, because you guys you're so alike that you have those so much in common that you can do all those things.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, that has been really one of the nicest surprises in my life, because, you know, he is much younger than me. So it was a late discovery for me. I was already grown up and gone by the time he emerged as a personality. And so it was such a happy surprise that, yeah, I like this guy. He's like me. For the first time in my entire family, there was somebody who was like me.
And you both live out west, right?
Yeah, well, I live, I mean, I've got an absolutely disgraceful number of houses. So I live, every time my bookshelves get full, I buy another house. And so I basically live wherever I want to live. And a lot of it this year, yeah, it's been in Wyoming. He and I are next but one neighbors. Which in Wyoming terms is, you know, like 4 miles apart. But yeah, that's our main residence at the moment. And so, yeah, we are physically pretty close. It's
beautiful. Tasha, Andrew's gorgeous wife, who's also a best-selling author. She writes the Lady Emily books. She's always posting pictures of Wyoming and the moose outside and the wildlife, and it's just gorgeous. I have another question. This one actually is a question from somebody else on behalf of somebody else. Jessica Peck always asks this question, so we're going to ask you both. She always wants to know, and this one, Lee, you first. She wants to know, what are your top 5 favorite books by other authors?
God, that's a hard one. And that is, you know, that's a very hard question, because first of all, you're going to insult somebody by forgetting them. Or secondly, you're going to sound like a pretentious git, because, you know, it's the sort of next step to saying that you were reading Dostoevsky when you were 7 and all that kind of stuff. But I think my favorite novel of all time is probably Sophie's Choice by William Styron. And then the next 4 would be just a random type of, just whatever mood I was in that day would make me feel attracted to certain titles or others. So it's easier in a way to think of authors that have influenced me. I mean, going way back, somebody like Alistair MacLean, who, a Scottish thriller writer, was a big influence on me in both positive and negative ways. You know, seeing what he did well and seeing the mistakes that he made. So yeah, I would tend to do it more by authors, but yeah, William Steyer and Sophie's Choice is probably is my all-time favorite. And I had the good fortune of I did a festival down in Palm Springs where his widow lives, Rose Styron. And I told her that that's my favorite book. And she told me all about the genesis of it, where he was writing a different book altogether. And then, but he had a dream, and she remembers him coming down in the morning and throwing away what he was working on and starting over with the dream. So that's how that book came about.
I will say, I wanted to tell you thank you. I picked up a book based upon your endorsement. And I absolutely loved it. It was The Marsh King's Daughter by Karen Dion. And across the top, you gave just a really nice blurb about it. And I said, well, if Lee liked it, I'm going to take a look at it. And read it. I loved it. It was so good. So thanks for the recommendation. And Andrew, what are your favorite top 5 or favorite authors?
Again, it's such a tricky question, that one. And I mean, one, and like Lee says, you got to, there's so many landmines involved in that question. But one book that I always think about is that, like Lee mentioned, when we were kids, we would always go to this particular library in Birmingham. And the one difference, I guess, when I was very little, rather than wanting to get, that huge selection of different books every week, I became obsessed with one book, and I always wanted to get the same book. It would drive my parents crazy because they would want me to read different ones, but I knew that I liked this book. I liked it for good reasons. And so I just always wanted to get it. And actually, funnily enough, later in life, Lee bought me a copy of it. So that book is called Small Pig. And I've just blanked on who wrote it now, but that was that book was fantastic. I remember it, and it's brilliant actually. I mean, it's for little kids, but it's about a pig who loves living in this really muddy sty on the farm. But then the farmer and his wife clean up the farm and make the sty. They get rid of all the mud, so he doesn't like it anymore. So he sets out. So there's conflict there. He sets out to find mud. So then he's on a quest. And he gets in all of these different dangerous situations. So there's all kinds of peril. And then in the end, he finds his way to the city, which, is this filthy, disgusting place as far as a country animal is concerned. So there's a nice sort of pastoral element to it. And then the pig finds what he thinks is mud. And there's this beautiful thing I really liked about it was the language. They always would talk about the pig liking living on the farm because he liked to sit down and sink down into the good, soft mud. Okay, so I'm remembering that from like 50 years ago. And so he finds what he thinks is mud and he sits down and sinks down into it. Only it turns out to be cement in the sidewalk, which has just been repaired. So then, of course, he's in tremendous danger. He's trapped. There's a big crowd. It's all horrible. But the farmer and his wife are so upset that they've lost the pig that they're out searching for him, and they find him and summon the fire brigade, who comes and rescues the pig right at the 11th hour. So really, it's got every conceivable aspect that you could want in a story. So Alfred Lurbel, that's who wrote it. I absolutely love that book. And then another one, again, sort of, well, actually, I'm going to go with a specific because, Lee mentioned Alistair MacLean, and he's a huge influence on me as well. And the one of his in particular for me is Ice Station Zebra. And the reason for that was when I was, I guess, the equivalent of grade school in England, we moved away from Birmingham, and I was about 10 years old, and I was in this class where we had a teacher who, he had the title of teacher. The only thing was he didn't really enjoy teaching very much. So he used to sit at his desk. And that school was very funny because this is again in the 70s, and they had this thing where they wouldn't mark your work. so one of the things is I'm terrible at geography, and we had a geography test one day. My parents asked me how I did, and I said, well, I don't know. So my mother, of course, assumed that that meant that I did horrendously badly and was just, trying to cover it up. But I said, no, we don't know how we did. So she said, well, there must have been a mark. There must have been numbers on the thing. It must have said, something out of 10. So I said, no, nothing like that. So she insisted that I bring it home to show her, which I did. And she saw there was no mark on it. So she went to the school and she stormed in to see the head teacher and said, what's the story? Why is my son's work not getting graded? And the guy explained that, at that particular time, they didn't really like to mark work because they felt it was elitist. And if you didn't do if somebody didn't do very well, then, it might make them feel bad. So the best thing was just to not mark any work at all. And then by extension, really kind of not teach anything either. So he wanted us to do what he called topics, which were like little projects, each one lasting a few weeks. And I did the first one and I tried really hard and I did what I thought was a brilliant job. But again, he wouldn't grade it. So after that, I thought, right, if you're not going to grade it, I'm not going to do it. So I just took books to school and I sat and I read the books under my desk all day long. And most of the time I was pretty good at avoiding getting caught. And but one day I was reading, does anybody remember Watership Down by Richard Adams? That was a fantastic book. I was reading that book. I was totally immersed in it to the point that I didn't notice the teacher coming out from behind his desk and sneaking up and catching me. So he kind of grabbed the book and he, belittled it and said that it was a baby book. And he said, then he went on this weird rant and he said, so, Andrew, you think you're a good reader, do you? Well, you're not. He said, unless you can pick up any book and read it without thinking, you're not a good reader. So first I thought, well, read without thinking. What's that all about? What's he talking? But then of course it sounded like a challenge. I thought, right, we'll see about that. So I went home that night and I thought, he said, pick up any book and read it. So I went to my dad's bookshelves and I picked a book at random. And I was a bit nervous by this point because, time had gone by and, the initial sort of rise to the challenge had kind of faded a little bit. And I thought, well, what if he's right? What if I can't read it? And I saw that it was called Ice Station Zebra. And I thought, I was 10. I was thinking, what? There are zebras on the ice in stations? What's this all about? So I started reading it and it blew me away. I had no concept. It's a book with an unreliable narrator. It starts with this fella blagging his way. It's in Scotland, where the nuclear submarine bases are. And he's blagging his way onto an American nuclear submarine, which is about to head up to the North Pole. And he blags his way on with this kind of, pretty plausible sounding story. And at the end of the first chapter, it's as if he starts talking directly to the audience. And he said, well, I was glad the captain believed it because I only just made it up. And I thought, what? He's lying to us. And then, of course, he lied several more times. And it just opened my mind, opened my eyes to the kind of things that you can do in books that I just didn't realize before. So that is, again, one of my all-time favorites.
Wow, that's wonderful. Well, it's so wonderful that you guys love books and you produce great books. And it's extraordinary. So, well, I hope you guys have great plans for Christmas. It's just less than 2 weeks away.
It is.
Well, almost a little over 2 weeks away, actually.
I'll have to start doing some shopping. Wow, I am looking forward to it. I've enjoyed, sadly, I've enjoyed this whole year, just so isolated and just my family. And that's how we're going to spend Christmas, just the three of us. And, me, my wife, and my daughter. And it'll be, like I say, it's been a terrible year for a lot of people, but I've enjoyed it. And because my daughter's so grown up now that I thought I'll see her, from time to time, obviously, the rest of my life. But this year I've seen a lot of her. And so it's been a real bonus from that point of view. So yeah, Christmas should be fun. I'm going to buy a Christmas tree and all that kind of thing. We're not going to cook. We found this place that deliver the meals for you, which is a lot more civilized.
Yes, definitely. And what about you and Tasha, Andrew?
Well, we've went out with a weird Christmas this year. I've actually had to come back to the UK. I'm in England right now, and one of the the downside is I won't see Tasha on Christmas Day, but the upside is I will get to spend it with my 2 daughters, including Brian. So. So that's going to be lovely because I don't often get to see them for Christmas. I haven't, with this pandemic. This is the first time I've been in the UK for a year, so it's going to be. I'm actually I'm in quarantine right now. Not due to any adverse symptoms or anything, but just purely because it's the rule after you've travelled. So I'm looking forward to being released from quarantine and catching up with the kids. They're grown up now too, so it's going to be great to see them. And again, I guess there'll be Christmas trees to be bought. I am going to cook though. I quite like cooking, so I've got the whole 9 yards lined up with, because I guess in England the traditional Christmas dinner is kind of like a Thanksgiving dinner in the States. So we've got the turkey and the Christmas and the roast potatoes and all of that kind of stuff all lined up. So yeah. So how about you, Deborah? What are your plans?
Staying alive. I just watched that Bee Gees documentary this weekend. So now that song really takes on a special meaning. Just keeping it very low key, social distancing, and as much as possible with friends, and just trying to stay safe. And hopefully all of you that are watching, you guys stay safe too. So well, listen, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much, Lee, Andrew, for visiting with us. It's just been an honor. And I loved the Sentinel. And I hope everybody who hasn't read it yet, read it. If you have read it, buy it for your friends and family. Perfect Christmas gift for everybody. So, and I'm looking forward to number 26 coming out. And maybe you guys can come back next year when it comes out. That would be great.
That would be
All right. Well, listen, guys, thank you guys, everybody. Have a great night. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.